So, good afternoon, everyone. Jai Bhim. I am Chitra Kumari. I'm doing bachelor's and master's in education, and I'm in my second year. I'm a student of TISS. I hope you all are doing well and in good health. Thank you so much for joining for the workshop. Today's workshop is a part of more extensive series of skill building initiative for Ambedkarite student at this. It is an attempt to compensate for the loss during the online mode, and many such workshops are scheduled in the near future. For today's workshop, we have Meera Bazaz and Deva Shahdevan to guide us on opportunity in foreign education. Thank you, Meera and Deva, for being part of this initiative and giving your valuable time. Meera has completed her MSc in Public Health and from the University of Bristol, and Deva has completed his development education from University of San Francisco. Meera and Deva are TIS alumni, and without any further ado, we will start with Deva first. Just a minute, I'll mute.
Can I share the screen?
Sure, Deva. Please go ahead.
Okay, I hope you guys can see the screen, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, just a second. Yeah, so hello everybody. My name is Deva Prasad and I currently I graduated from TIS Tuljapur in the year 2019. I completed my bachelor's in social sciences, following which I moved to the US to pursue my master's in development economics. I completed my master's also recently, like a month back. Currently, I'm working. I'm looking for work basically in the US. So I'm going to share some of my experience in dealing with higher education abroad, more specifically in the US. So I'm going to focus. I'm going to focus a lot on GRE in this one, and actually, I would just mention it straight away. I'm going to focus also more on on doctoral program, like doctoral degree opportunities in the US, specifically the PhD.
Guys, please mute yourself, whoever is unmuted. Sorry for the interruption.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I've made the slide in such a way that there are some links and stuff. So I would be more than happy to share the presentation with the organizers so that you can have access to it. Yeah, so I'll just kick off right away. So just an overview of what I'm going to cover. Uh, I'm going to cover like the key elements of an application to majorly the US universities. It covers like statement of purpose, writing sample recommendation letters, your English proficiency test, and the GRE. I've made the GRE in bold letters so that I could go more into the details of it. Uh, and then I would like just present some links and resources for doctoral, pre-doctoral, and fellowship programs in the US. And finally, I would, if you have any questions, you may ask, you may go ahead. Even while I'm speaking, if you want to ask anything, please feel free to interrupt and question. You can also use the chat to post any questions, which I could read after I end my presentation. Uh, so I'll just uh, yeah start off with the statement of purpose. Like statement of the purpose is like many universities in the US, even if it is for selected master's programs or PhD admissions, they will definitely be asking for your SOP letters. So SOP is basically in different universities, it may be known as your motivation letter, your personal statement, or a letter of interest. It basically describes how fit are you for a specific program. Since I'm dealing with a lot of people here who are studying social sciences, which is a very broad discipline, you may be in any field, whether it's economic development studies, education relevant courses, or sociology, anthropology, and all this stuff. Basically, in SOP, you ideally it should be like a one-page essay describing your interest in the program. Why do you want to pursue that program? And if you're writing an SOP, I would always recommend you to stick to a very coherent and to the point statement of purpose without elaborating on very flowery details. Uh, in this slide, like I said, I have mentioned some additional resources, more specifically to the US universities. Like I have mentioned some well-known universities in the US, which post their guidelines on how to frame your SOP or what they actually demand for in an SOP. Uh, then comes your writing samples. Specifically, writing samples are not so common in case of master's admissions in the US. Um, and but for doctoral programs, PhD programs, they will definitely be asking. Many universities, in fact, will be asking for your writing sample. It could be your, and this is something that you people would have had the experience of, especially if you complete your master's from TISC, because you have an experience of writing your research papers or dissertation thesis and other papers. Uh, Again, like published papers or something that is written with your faculty can carry a lot of weight. And always make sure that your papers are well cited. And one thing I would definitely mention here is all your documents that you're sending is very closely read by your graduate admissions committee when they, like wherever you apply abroad. Uh, there is some disturbance. Do you mind if you could turn your audio off?
Can you make me the host? I'll check to the audios. Whoever is unmuted, I'll mute them. Dipesh, could you please mute those people who are unmuted?
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Okay, good enough. Yeah, then moving on to your letters of recommendation. Letters of recommendations are like your reference letters, which you can get from somebody you had worked under or somebody who had taught you in any coursework. Uh, they also carry a good amount of weight, especially for admissions, and never like hesitate to reach out to your professors in case you're applying abroad for your reference letters, especially for someone who you have worked under directly, somebody who has advised you in your dissertation. uh, they should be more than happy to write you a recommendation letter, and it and always have the professors or somebody who has managed you in your professional experience as a referee. So yeah, don't hesitate to reach out to them in case you're applying abroad and they ask for your recommendation letters. Okay, and then I'll move on to the proficiency, where the important tests and which are prerequisites to your graduate admissions abroad. Uh, so so you have like a couple of types of tests, which one is like your proficiency test, which basically is allows you to prove to these foreign schools that you're proficient in English. And then you have the skills or the aptitude test, which is GRE, which I'll dig into more in this presentation. Your proficiency tests, which tell about the English proficiency, is the two prominent ones are IELTS and TOEFL. Both are very similar in pattern. Both have like four sections of reading, listening, speaking, and writing. I am not going to dig more into it because IELTS, I think Meera is going to explain a bit on it. TOEFL also, it's very similar to IELTS. There are some subtle differences. For example, your scoring differs in both of them. Like TOEFL is on the scale of, like, you'll be scored out of a total of 120, and IELTS is, I think, on a scale of 10. Both have very subtle differences, like maybe your pricing, your costs, and like preparation and the order of the sections. Some small differences. Again, in the presentation, I've mentioned the link where you can like look at the differences in these two tests. So for my, I would say like the place where I applied for my many places that I applied to for my graduate postgraduate admissions, many places asked me for my proficiency test results, but because I was in more of like in a technical field that was economics, I was asked to give the GRE as well. So I was really wondering why I should be sorry why I should be like writing all these exams. So one thing that I did is, and I mean I would suggest you doing it if you're applying abroad and they're asking for your English proficiency. You can you can tell them that your medium of instruction has been in English. That's what I did. I kind of approached the universities that I applied to, and some of them actually agreed. So this is like, so I got a proficiency certificate from TIS itself. This is just the sample of what I got from TIS Jaipur campus, which basically certified, telling the university where I was applying to that my records and performance was good and decent, and I'm like proficient in written English, oral English, and interactive ability. So like, and also the fact that my medium of instruction in English was in English, and all lectures, assignments, everything associated with the university was in English. So I was kind of waived off with the requirements pertaining to writing these English proficiency exams, which made sense to me, and I feel. I really don't understand the point of writing English proficiency exams, honestly, because being from India, we are mostly exposed to English language curriculum, and it really it makes me wonder why we are actually giving English proficiency exams. But in case if the universities don't accept your such certificates, uh, you wouldn't be left with another option than writing the TOEFL or the IELTS. Yeah. Now coming to what I wanted to discuss about. So this is the GRE. So GRE is basically your graduate research examination, which tests your skills in the following areas, which is your verbal, quantitative reasoning, critical thinking, and analytical writing. So GRE test is more like very technical in nature. For example, if you're moving to the US, GRE tests are definitely asked for people who are from the STEM background, like science, technology, engineering, and management, because they need to know like a scale through which they know that what their technical skills are. However, in fields associated with social sciences, it is rare, but I would say that for PhD admissions, it is quite common, and it is actually yeah, it's very common for universities to ask for your GRE scores. So it may be important for you all to probably attempt a GRE. GRE is I would say it would definitely need like a month's preparation. And for me, I only attempted once, and I don't claim to be an expert in GRE, but yeah, from my experience, I would say that you need to put some work on it if you plan to give the exam. Your GRE scores are accepted throughout, mostly all over for uh, for any research-oriented programs or stuff like that. So the test structure is such that you have like three main sections, three main themes. One is your analytical writing, one is your verbal reasoning, the last one is your quantitative reasoning. Uh, so under analytical writing, you have one section which consists of two tasks, 30 minutes each. Analytical writing is just like you're given an issue or an argument and you have to elaborate on it. And there is like a time constraint, and you have to write a good chunk. You'll get space in your computer screen. Remember, GRE is only a computer administered test. For your verbal reasoning, you have two sections with 20 questions each. That means 40 questions in total for your verbal round, with 30 minutes for each section. Like you have an hour for verbal reasoning. For quant, you have again two sections, 20 questions each, with 35 minutes. And there is one experimental section. Sorry, there is one experimental section which could be anything, and you wouldn't know that this is your experimental section. And experimental section actually is not a scored section. It is not included in your scoring section. So uh, so yeah, overall, you would spend around like 3 hours 45 minutes for the exam. You will get like a 10 minutes break following the third section. So in total, you can see like 1 plus 2 plus 2 plus 1. You have six sections in total. Following the third section, you get like a 10-minute break. Talking about the scoring, you have the scoring starts from 130, and your maximum score that you can get in any in the verbal or quantitative section is 170. For example, tell you like you have like 40 questions for verbal and 40 questions for quant. Suppose you get a perfect 40 in verbal and quant, that means you're getting a score of 170. Agar if you have like 35 correct in both, that means you're getting like 165 in each. So overall, as you finish your exam on the day of your GRE, you will get your scores in the computer. Uh, so you will be shown your score out of a 340 scale, that is 170 plus 170 or 340, or suppose you got like 30 30 in each, that means you got 160 in each, that means that's like a 320 score on 340. I would say that in GRE, for technical background people, definitely the score must be on a higher side, like preferably over 320. But for humanities and social sciences, I would definitely recommend always keeping an aim of 315, 310 or 315. Your scores on the writing section is scaled in 0 to 6 range for each task that you get. And this is added to your overall score, but you won't be receiving the scores immediately after the exam. So I have again mentioned the link for a detailed overview of each section, and how to register and where to register, how to select the slots for the test, when to select. You can head to this link. I have also provided some additional free resources which you can take help of if you plan on giving the GRE. Again, for the GRE, I would always recommend to have everything set before like attempting a GRE. For example, if you know which universities you're aiming for, or um, what courses you're looking at, if they actually demand your GRE scores, then I would definitely start looking for GRE slots like a month in advance before you're planning to apply to the university. And one very important tip that I would give is, as soon as your GRE ends, you have an option of reporting test scores. You can select up to 4 universities to which you can send your GRE scores to for no cost, for free. The thing why it is important is, if you don't make use of the feature, you might need to send the GRE scores separately, which may carry a cost. So yeah, that is there. Once you're done with your GRE exam, make sure. That's why I said make sure that you have your universities in mind. In case they ask your GRE scores, you can immediately send your GRE scores as your exam gets over. So yeah, again for the resources, like there are very interesting resources on the internet. Just remember that internet is your best friend, and you have basically most of it on the internet, and there are like proper official guides which are paid, and you need to spend something for preparing. But I don't really see the need to buying an official guide unless you want to uh, correctly know all the details related to the questions. But the resources I've mentioned here can be quite helpful. Especially, I would say for me personally, even though initially I underestimated like the English and verbal stuff in this exam, but English is actually quite hard. I would definitely recommend learning. So there is in GRE there is always a set of words which you need to sort of like memorize and understand how it is used, because that comes up repeatedly in the test. So for that, like you have some apps by Magoosh. You have like flashcards that you could use to learn new words and how to use them in different contexts. So yeah, please feel free to use that. Download such apps on your phone or anywhere that you could use. And finally, like in academia in the US, like I mentioned, for masters, it is not like it's not really an ideal place for social science. But from the trend that I have seen, even for those who complete their masters from Europe, they usually move to the US to pursue their PhDs or any postdoctoral degrees. So I mentioned this pre-doctoral programs, because pre-doctoral is sort of like a pathway to your PhD. Pre-doctoral programs is like a sort of like an employed position in the US universities, where you work under a supervisor, work under a professor for a research project. I have mentioned some fellowships which are the renowned ones in case for Indian students in the US. Please do feel free to use these and check how the deadlines were. So one very important thing is I understand the foreign missions are very time consuming. It does take a lot of you need to be very organized in how you approach, especially if you're very budget constrained and you need to have a specific schedule in mind how and when to apply for what, because it's not just the GRE. There are so many factors involved in like applying to universities abroad, because you're looking for how you're going to eventually get funded for it. So always, like in my experience, just for me, I started like a year in advance. I gave my GRE like 7 8 months before my actual admission procedure was to begin with. And yeah, that's all I have. If you have any questions, please you can feel free to ask. I Okay, I don't see any questions for now in the chat. If you have anything, please go ahead. I'll stop sharing screen. Should I, or should I keep it on?
You can stop the share if people want. Maybe you can put it up again, and we'll be sharing it with.
Yeah, I'll share the link to the organizer. So I think it should be, if you guys send your email IDs or something, probably you'll get the slides. My master's course was partly funded. It was not. I got. In fact, when I joined, I didn't. I started getting scholarships after I joined the course, because mine was like department funded scholarships and all that stuff. So it was not fully funded, and it was not funded by any external organization, third party organization. Please elaborate on the overall cost component, travel, tuition fees, etc. Okay. Travel fees. I mean, so tuition fees. So basically, most of the scholarships that you are applying. So if you're applying for PhD programs, I would say I'm talking about, like I specifically mentioned here. I was mostly talking about PhD programs. PhD programs in the US is mostly you are almost fully funded. So that's why I would always encourage people to look for PhD programs in the US. You have like fully funded fellowships. Otherwise, if you are looking for master's programs or uh, uh, programs which may be partly funded, you have to incur some costs. Uh, Again, I would travel costs and all. It depends when you are traveling and all that stuff. There are so many variables that you're going to take into account. Tuition fees. Tuition fees for. Are you asking for like a specific master's program, or is it? But anyway, if it's master's program, I would say it is on the expensive side. Like it's charged on the basis of each credit, and unless you have, even if you unless you have any sort of scholarship, it's very difficult to, because for me also, I relied on my partly funded scholarships to kind of make sure of everything. And the other part was, when I came here, I started working immediately in the university, so I kind of was able to manage well enough. How did you manage your expenses during during your course? Was it covered in the scholarship? Scholarship only covered my tuition expenses. Whichever courses I took, like I mentioned, whatever credits I accumulated over the years, it was all paid by the scholarship. And other expenses like my living and stuff was mostly paid by me working on campus. I was a TA, RA, and I had some tutorship jobs and stuff like that on the campus. So I got a good amount of money to manage my expenses, manage my living expenses basically. Even though I was living in quite an expensive city in the US, I could manage it well. And currently also I'm like managing all my expenses by kind of working here and there. For now, I'm not fully employed, but I'm on the way. So I'm almost there to get a job. So kindly elaborate more on pre-doctoral programs. Okay, I mentioned pre-doctoral programs here because this was something which I was very keen on, because I was I was not so ready on directly jumping onto PhD. Pre-doctoral programs are like, I can talk about from an economics point of view. There are many well-known universities like the Stanford, you have the Yale and the Cornell or the and the Harvard, where you have pre-doctoral programs where basically you're like a fully it's a full employment position. You're fully employed with the university as like a research analyst, as a research assistant, or a research associate under a supervised faculty. You'll be working under a project. So in the US, it's like there are many projects which are like large scale projects. Working with big data, or you have to travel places where you're doing the project. So they employ a lot of people to work on it. So you have like a team of research assistants, wherein you can also take the advantage of auditing some courses with the university, and while also you're getting paid hourly a good amount to ensure that you're living there as an employed person. And I say that it's a good pathway to a PhD because you get very good training, especially if you have a pre-doctoral degree from a well-known university under a well-known professor. You are at an advantage because you have good recommendations for your PhD admissions, and you have good exposure basically to how things are in the US. Okay, I touched upon my scholarship and how I manage my expenses. I don't think I would like to elaborate more.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a
Hi.
question.
Yeah,
Am
please.
I audible?
Yeah, you are.
So, so right now I've completed my master's, and for next 2 or 3 years at least, I am thinking that I'll work, and then only I'm planning to apply
Yeah,
for
makes
any
sense.
university.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is the best way to utilize these 2-3 years to prepare for mm, the plan, to pursue the plan that I have in my mind after 3 years to
Is
apply?
it like
Yeah. So
okay?
how
Do
can
you
you
is
utilize
it like
these?
more into the is it like more into the research side of things?
Yes.
May I know what your field is
Uh,
like?
Masters in social work, and my specialization is
Okay,
community organization and development practices.
okay. Yeah, I think if specifically if you're like looking for research programs for your doctoral or any postgraduate admissions, I would say that in these 2 years, if you could, uh, because you already have like a good exposure to writing papers and how to frame good, have a good academic, having good academic writing skills, you can definitely polish that. Because I would definitely say from my conversation with somebody who evaluates these graduate admissions, all these CVs and all these documents they get from international students, they very keenly notice how your writing is, how suited your program. Suited you are to the program. For example, PhDs, they are definitely going to weigh a lot on your writing sample. So if 2 years, even if you're working, especially MSW, I believe if you're working like with an NGO, you're writing like reports or submitting all these presentations, you could polish your skills on that, which will definitely improve your application. So I think the 2 years, best way to utilize it is having all these things ready, how to proceed with the application, and yeah, basically all these documents, if you could do it very well. Because I honestly telling you, PhD admissions are very competitive because you have all these stream of students studying masters from the Europe, planning to move for doctorate programs in the US. So it's quite competitive. So I mean, again, internet is your best friend. Make use of everything there is. How things are developing. For now, I would say that people are looking for a lot of academic related positions. So uh, yeah, you can work on it for that. And work experience count, anywhere you're working is definitely, I believe, is going to be related to something that you would want to pursue in the future, right? So uh, yeah, there is that. And yeah,
Thank you.
I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you. And the second part of the question is, so you've mentioned some exams, IELTS,
Mm-hmm.
TOEFL, and GRE.
Mm-hmm.
So how much prior to the actual application process begins should I write these exams? What's the,
Okay,
you know,
yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, in mostly admissions in the US are like you have like fall admissions or your spring admissions. Fall admissions primarily in the US it's like uh, your session starts in the fall, that is August, September, and your spring admissions are like January or something. So suppose you're applying for next year August admissions admission cycle. I would say that have everything like initiate your application procedure a year in advance. So if you're graduating in the year 2022 and you are planning to immediately start your masters in 2022 or doctorate programs or whatever in 2022, make sure that you start planning things from this July, August onwards, so that you can plan on writing the GRE. GRE, I wrote it like around 7-8 months prior to actually join the course. And for even for IELTS and TOEFL, again, always check the requirements that the universities are asking for. If they do mention that you need a proficiency test result and stuff and all that stuff, I I would advise you to give your TOEFL and IELTS, TOEFL or IELTS, like definitely 6-7 months in advance, so that you can also focus on other aspects of your application to be on the safer side. And again, the other thing is, you can GRE and all these exams you can attempt many times, but I would obviously advise against it because it's expensive writing such exams. Always like give your best in the first shot itself. Again, the expense part is one thing that will always be in your mind whenever you're applying. So yeah, if you are applying way in advance and it went bad, you have like a go back option and like apply, write the exam again to improve your score basically. Yeah. So yeah, I'll move to some other question. Scholarship, how do you manage okay, tuition fees for pre-doctoral programs or doctoral degrees? Like I said, tuition fees are most of the well-known doctoral programs are fully funded in the US, and they basically pay you for you doing your research, especially at such a high level. If you're like pursuing like a doctoral degree, their universities do pay you. For pre-doctoral program, also you are an employee with the university. You are paid hourly wages depending on which state in the US you are in. For example, if you're in like uh, if you're in California, you may be getting like $20 to $25 an hour of work, and probably like for pre-doctoral degrees, you will be allowed to work for like 40 hours a week. So for a month, you'll get a good amount of money to go ahead with your expenses and stuff. Can we use one LOR to apply for multiple universities, or does it each application require a unique LOR? Uh, okay, you can use. I mean, the thing is, many universities, what they do is they may directly contact your referee, the professor who you are taking your recommendation letter from. They may directly be contacting you. Sorry, they may be directly contacting the professor, and the professor may be supposed to reply to the email. I wouldn't know the exact procedure of it because I have never written a LOR for myself, but yeah, you can have like an LOR prepared. Like you can ask your professor to send an LOR in case some universities ask you to attach your letter of recommendation. Uh, so in my bachelor's case, one of my professor asked me to write the LOR myself, basically like getting a theme of what I've done and all that stuff. So uh, so yeah, I kind of edited and wrote my own LOR, and he made the required changes. So I had kept some soft copies of the LORs in case the application portal to a university allowed me to upload the LOR directly. Otherwise, in most cases, I would say that the universities directly contact the referees. So you're basically sending your email address or your phone details of your referees to the university you're applying to. Yeah.
Thank you, Deva, for this round of question and answer. And thank you for your time. We'll invite Meera now. Thank you, Meera. You can go ahead.
Yeah. Hi. So my name is Meera. I was actually in Deva's batch back in TIS Tuljapur. So I graduated in, I completed a bachelor's in social work, and I went on to do an MSc in public health from the UK, which I'm going to try and discuss a little bit. And we're going to talk about IELTS and sort of strategies to prepare for it. What's the exam exactly about? How can you go about writing your personal statement? How can you prepare your LORs if you have to, which I had to, which Deva had to as well. And we're going to talk about a few scholarships that are available for master's students in the UK. So can I please request you to project the PPT? Yeah. Yeah, okay. So the only qualifying test I had to give for my master's program, and which is usually the case with a lot of students in the UK, is the IELTS exam. Now I'm going to be talking about this in a little detail in the next slide. And when we talk about the application process, you're going to have to write the personal statement, which is also called the statement of purpose when you talk about the US or other countries. But in the UK, it's called the personal statement, and it's pretty similar. The format is pretty similar. Then you have to usually give 2 LORs, which you might have to write on your own, depending on your professor or whoever you receive the LOR from. Which I'm not going to speak about here. Then the transcripts and the mark sheets. Now, the difference between these two is that the transcript is a 1-page document which has a consolidated score of all of your semesters that you have completed until now. And you have to apply for that separately. And your admin might actually charge you a fees for it. So when I had to get my transcript from my admin head, I had to pay a fee of rupees 500. So I would advise that if you are, applying for this, keep in mind that there might be a little delay, and have the transcript ready way before you apply for your master's program or whatever you are aiming for, right? And lastly, we're going to talk a little bit about scholarship mapping and the available scholarship opportunities for your master's programs in the UK. Okay, can we move to the next one? Okay. So now we're going to talk a little about the IELTS. And before I start, I want to try and understand, what sort of idea and what sort of picture you all have about IELTS. So can anyone tell me if they know about IELTS and what it's about? Whatever you've heard about it.
May I go ahead?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so IELTS is an English proficiency test exam which is conducted by the British Council, and like lots of universities across the world accept the score of IELTS, and there is this score in the band of 6 to 9. So yeah.
Yeah, great. So the IELTS is basically an English proficiency examination which UK universities mandate you to take if you don't belong to an English speaking country. And since we fall in that category, we do have to give the exam, right? So there are actually 4 components to the exam. There's a listening, reading, writing, and speaking, but you have to give 2 separate exams for this. So the first part of the exam is the listening, reading, and writing. So this is the longer part of the exam. It's 2 hours and 45 minutes long, and you have to either give it in person. So I did that. I gave the paper-based exam. So for that, you'll be allotted an official IELTS test center, which is closest to the place you live in. And then you'll have to go there on the allotted date and, just write it up. The other option is the online exam, which they've recently started. So the benefits of that are that, you have more slots to select from. So, you can choose dates based on your convenience, on your availability, and you can even get the results faster. So you can get the results in 3 to 4 days. And I don't think there's a great difference in the way the exam is structured. So you can choose whether you want to give it on paper or whether you want to give it online. Now, just to give a little idea of what you can expect in this part of the exam, you'll have MCQs, you can have basic sentence completions. They'll give like an incomplete flow chart. You have to complete that in basic English sentences or phrases. some summary, you have to reframe a summary or rephrase a summary. You can even have stuff like diagram labeling or matching. So, it's basic stuff. The only thing is you have to have a good hold of vocabulary. You have to have a strong vocabulary, because they expect that if you are going to be studying in an English, and in my English, I mean like a UK based university, you need to have a basic understanding of the type of English that is spoken in those universities. And that might be a little different from the standard of English that we are usually used to in Indian universities. Right. And also, if anybody has any questions, they can type it out in the chat box or stop me at any moment as well. Right. Okay, so that was a little brief about the first half of the test. Now I want you, to kind of focus more on the speaking part, because this requires more preparation, right? It's not very difficult, the speaking part. The first half will be, they'd be expecting you to speak about familiar topics, like, what do you do at home? What is your family like? Talk about your best friends or your studies or what hobbies you have. Now, if you talk about this with a friend or somebody you're familiar with, it's not very difficult, and you don't get nervous about it. But when you have to talk to a trained IELTS examiner about it, you get a little nervous. I mean, I tend to get nervous and anxious about it. So the only trick with this is that you have to keep practicing this. If you're alone, or if you're with a friend that you trust, just keep practicing these regular conversations, so that you get into a flow of talking, and the assessment criteria that they are trying to evaluate for you wouldn't be like a problem for you later on, right? So they'd be assessing you on your fluency, on your coherence, or how connected your sentences are. How is your grammar? Is it well structured? Are you using different kinds of words? Are you exercising your vocabulary? What is your pronunciation like, right? So it's not very difficult, but when you're put on the spot and you have to talk for 2 to 3 minutes straight on a topic, anybody would get nervous, right? It's like public speaking. It's like somebody is evaluating you and deciding your future, which is true. But yeah, you have to get trained in that. You have to be comfortable speaking about these simple things. It's not scary. They'll ask you the simplest questions, but it's the examiner that's the scary part. Okay, right. So let's get to some resource material for this. Now, I didn't practice a lot. Maybe I was practicing for about 3 to 4 weeks, and I referred to the British Council practice workbooks that they'd sent. So once you register on the British Council website, you automatically get like a handbook and a manual and some practice worksheets. And those are more than enough for you to, be well trained in your IELTS test, right? Now, after you are done with your training and you're kind of confident that, I can give the IELTS exam, I would recommend that you take the IELTS official practice test, which I will link later. I mean, I'll add that to this sheet, the link. And you can actually get a nice feedback report and an indicative score for each section, right? So like somebody had earlier, when I had asked what you know about IELTS, somebody had said that there are different bands to it, right? So the maximum score you can get in IELTS right now is, I think, in 9, if I'm not wrong. And I managed to get an 8.5. So if you can, focus on these areas and just like sort of keep these things in mind that I discussed and continuously practice and just refer to these workbooks and do this practice test well. And also go to this YouTube channel called IELTS Liz, okay? This would just be an additional thing, right? The workbooks are pretty good, sufficient, but I would recommend that you look at the YouTube channel as well. So yeah, this was a good, I think this is how I would like to summarize IELTS for you right now. If you have any questions, I can take them up now or after the presentation as well. Okay, so can we move to the next slide? Okay, so now we're going to talk a little about how to draft a personal statement and an LOR. LOR for those of you who will have to draft it, right? So what are they looking for in a personal statement, right? Obviously, you have to impress them, but you have to impress them in a way that you seem authentic, that you seem confident about doing this master's program or this PhD program, right? So you have to evidence your interest in the subject. You have to give examples from your life. You have to maybe share a personal story. Why are you so inspired to do this program? What brought you? Share like a personal example, share some fieldwork stories, maybe share some research that you've done that brought you here, some findings, just summarize those. that would come under relevant work experience education, right? Now you have to really zero down on why you want to get into this university, right? I mean, that would be a very personal reason. I can't really go deeper into that. Then you have to sort of document your relevant academic interests and passions and how they link into this course, right? Also, if it's a research intensive course, because mine was, so since I did an MSc in public health and not a master's in public health, it was more research oriented. And there was a need for me to sort of prove that, I want to go further my research capacities and pursue this in the longer run as well. So I gave them a few examples of what sort of research I would want to focus on and the kind of research I've done as part of my dissertation or other research projects. Then you can also touch upon extracurriculars, but you have to highlight what sort of leadership skills or what sort of competencies you've gained from that. So you have to focus less on the extracurriculars and more of what it has made you and why it has made you more fit for the course and how you could use those skills in your present course, right? Like it could be leadership, it could be teamwork, any kind of skills you've learned, right? Now, talking about the LORs, usually most UK universities expect you to give them 2 LORs in your application portal, right? So one has to be from a faculty member, from somebody who's taught you. And I would recommend that you go to your dissertation supervisor for this because they know your research interests, they know what you're passionate about, you've worked with them closely. So I took one of my LORs from my research supervisor and the other one was from the head of the social work department. So I think that would be a good fit for like showing that, I've kind of excelled in my social work course. I've learned these things. I've undertaken this research. This is what I've gained. This is what my professors think of me, right? And the other LOR could also be from previous employer. So both of them don't have to be faculty members. If you think that you've really hit it off with the previous employer and they really know you well and would write very flowery things about you, go ahead, go to your previous employer, get a nice LOR from them. I was not very confident about that. So both of my LORs were from faculty members, right? And also, if you are drafting your own LOR, which ideally we shouldn't have to do, and I don't know why we're expected to do this, right? You need to highlight your skills and give examples, right? You need to say why I'm fit for this, why my research fits with your course objectives. What is my relationship with my referee? Why does he think or she think or they think I'm such a brilliant person, right? So use examples, use your own experiences. Don't just give skills, always give examples on the side. Okay, so this is what I have to say about these 2 things. Now let's come to the last slide. Okay, so here I've tried to do some basic research and prepare a few scholarships that are popular, that a lot of Indian students apply to. And I couldn't find Indian government ones, but I could update this one and send this PPT to you a few hours later or maybe tomorrow. So the foreign government ones, which are very popular. So here foreign means UK government, right? The Commonwealth scholarships for one. I think all of us would have heard about this, right? This is basically for masters and PhD students. Now the Chevening scholarship is only for master's programs. And this is basically to support mid-career professionals who have already been in positions of leadership. So I don't know if all of us qualify for this category, but Commonwealth scholarships, definitely, I think you should apply for this one. Now, there are a lot of university-based scholarships which are specific to either departments or specific research cohort or stuff like that. So I couldn't give a lot of examples there, but there was one that was coming up on a lot of websites, which was the Dr. Manmohan Singh scholarships, right? So this is basically for doctoral degrees in subjects like science, technology, economics, and social sciences. So this will cover your fees and your living costs. This is the basic information that's available on the website. And you can even go and look this up for a detailed version of it, right? Now, some organization or foundation-based scholarships, which the first one I had also applied for, sadly didn't get through. But the first one, the Lady Meherbai D. Tata Education Trust gift scholarship, is only for women applicants, women graduates of reputed universities, and they have like criteria. So if you worked in like community health or child health, or maybe some science fields also, you do fit the eligibility criteria. So definitely apply for this if you fit the criteria. Then there's an Inlang scholarship, which is given by a foundation, and they have joint scholarship schemes with Imperial College London, University of Cambridge, and the Royal College of Art London, right? So this scholarship would cover your full tuition fees, your living expensive, and even a one-way travel allowance and a health allowance, which is a big deal, right? So do look this up and apply if you fit the criteria. The last one is the Sri Ratan Tata scholarships. This is for both masters and PhD programs, and it's not a big scholarship, but it consists of a partial international airfare from India to your abroad university. So yeah, these are very this is a very limited picture of the scholarships, but yeah, I can update this slide. I can send attach links to this. And also, I would recommend you to keep going through university-based scholarships, because maybe they keep adding them every year, which may be specific to your department or specific to, like I said, university or a program, right? So do keep an eye out for that. And yeah, I think that sort of finishes our scholarship thing. And with that, my talk. And if you have any questions now, I'd be happy to take them. Okay.
Ma'am, could you please elaborate on the material kind of thing? Like, is it okay for a marginalized student to get those materials on a very like an economical basis thing? Like, is it possible from a student who is coming from a different socioeconomic background to have those material in hand? And what kind of cost, I think I want to elaborate, what kind of cost is take to give those exams? And if we can form a consolidated kind of repository of all the materials, if many of you have, so it's more than enough for us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the IELTS exam, when I had given it 2 years ago, it was priced at about 12,000 rupees. And I don't think they give any scholarships for that. So you will have to, put that bill on your own. But otherwise, yeah, the scholarships definitely you can apply for. There are all those kinds of opportunities that you can go for. But I will, I will add links. I will create a nice resource you can refer to, like a nice resource repository for preparing for IELTS. But I would say don't stress a lot about IELTS. It's not the most stressful thing in your application. Focus more on your personal statements, focus more on your LORs, and yeah, other things.
Thank you so much.
Does anybody else has any other questions? You can go ahead and ask.
Yes, I wanted to ask that what is the mode according to you? It's like the correct IELTS score that we can consider it's good enough, like the band which is like good enough.
Right. So a lot of universities expect you to have like a minimum of a 6.5 or a 7 band, which should be fine. I mean, even if you get 7, it's not really, they're not evaluating your English skills. They just want you to meet that cutoff, right? So even if you get a 7, that's good enough. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We'll wait for a few more questions, and yeah, there is one question on chat.
So this really, I mean, I've heard a lot of people apply to like 10 universities, 20 universities, but I mean, I applied to only 3, and I don't know how, but I was lucky to get through 2 of them. So I would say really, since it does cost, there's an application fee associated with your application for most of the universities. I would say be a little mindful about that and only target universities where you think you have a high chance of getting in. If your course requires you to have work experience, be mindful that you had that work experience. Be mindful that you've done that sort of research that they expect you to have done, right? So yeah, I would say, even if you, like, from my personal experience, if you apply to even like 3-4 universities and for sure, like, not just intuitively, but for sure that you can get through, that should be good enough. Yeah, I don't know about Deva though. I applied to only 3. So yeah.
Yeah, same. I don't think I think I applied to like 4 or 5. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. So, again, talking about the score band, a lot of universities in general just expect you to meet that cutoff score. So 6.5 or 7, they are not really, scrutinizing your application and seeing tum kitni achhi English bolte ho, kitni nahi bol sakte. Wo bas, they want to see you met that criteria. It's just a formality, right? Ideally, I don't think we should even have to do that because we come from English speaking colleges. And I actually met another guy there who was from Africa, and he came from an English speaking college and he didn't have to give IELTS. So I found that a little unfair. But anyway, right. So score band wise, it's either 6.5 or 7 when it comes to UK universities. And SOP, again, really, it's a very like personally drafted document. It needs to, don't think so much that you have to like impress your professors. Think that, how can I prove to them that I really want to be in this course, that my experiences have led me here, and this course would only benefit me. Like the skills that I gained from this would only add value to my skill set, right? So think of it in, yeah, that sort of thing. Does this academic score matter much? So yeah, some universities expect you to score maybe like 60% or 70% in your undergraduate, which is pretty general, and I think that's fair. So if you do meet that criteria, yeah, definitely, in that regard, your TIS score would matter, which would be a final GPA. You'd have to convert it into a percentage. So yeah, that does matter. Yeah.
I hope all your doubts are clear. If there is any last question, you can go ahead.
I have one question. Hi, Meeta. I just wanted to ask that which scholarships did you apply for, and which scholarship did you get in, and how are your expenses managed right now?
Yeah, good question. Very relevant question. So I'd applied for the Lady Meherbai scholarship. Like I said, I applied for one of the department scholarships at my university, and I had applied for another one, a name I forgot, but I think I applied for 3 of them. Unfortunate, I didn't get any, but I was working part-time at my university, so that sort of helped me manage expenses. It was a university job as a postgraduate student ambassador, and university jobs in the UK usually pay better than your regular part-time job, like a telephone or a retail, that sort of job, right? So I would recommend that even if you don't manage to get a scholarship, some scholarships are smaller, like I don't know about if you've heard about IDP. So it's an education consultancy based in India, and it also offers scholarships. So if you've scored like maybe 90% or above, they do have a scholarship that they offer for, I think, 2,000, between 2,000 and 3,000 pounds, which is a small amount, but it's still a scholarship. It does help you manage expenses in some way. So yeah, you could always register with these education consultancies and get a part-time job. There are lots of part-time jobs going. Your career service at your university is going to help you with everything, part-time, full-time. Yeah. So that's sort of how I managed my expenses mostly. And also I was sharing accommodation with a friend. So most of the people most international students prefer to live alone. But thankfully, I knew someone going from India, and she was from my batch, so we shared accommodation. So that also helped in cost cutting. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think now we have any more questions. Thank you, Meera. Thank you, Deva, for taking your time out and being here. Thank you for all the guidance. So we'll call it a day. Thank you so much for joining, everyone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
Thank you.